we are recording.
Sounds good. And I will give it about 5 seconds here so we can start on the dot. All right. I will go ahead and call the meeting to order and stand and invite everyone to join in the Pledge of Allegiance.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Way easier in person. Okay. So, agenda approval. Is there anything from staff?
Mayor and Council, one item. We'd like to add item 11C, which would be job offer for police officer, and I can walk through that. And then just additionally, for those who are in person as well as on the Zoom meeting, we do have a couple public comment opportunities. We have one at open forum for items not on the agenda. We have one at planning business, unfinished business, and new business. And those are opportunities for those in person to submit a comment card. For those virtual, Jessica will walk through the instructions to raise your hand. We do have a 5-minute limit, and if you're beyond that time, the mayor and council can add more time. That is all.
Sounds good. Thank you. And you said 11C. Did you mean 10C?
I did mean 10C.
I think you said. I could have also been wrong, but I.
Nope, I'm sorry, 10C. Thank you.
Perfect. Anything from council?
No.
Okay. I'll entertain a motion to approve the agenda with the addition of item 10C.
So moved.
Second.
Any discussion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Easy enough. Commission representatives, we have Dean Varenkamp here in person from Planning Commission and Sharon Meister, I believe, online from Parks and Trails. Did I get that right? She online?
Yes,
Perfect.
she is.
Sounds good. Then we'll go right into open forum.
And Mayor, we have nobody here. For those who are on
Yeah.
virtual, if you want to use the raise hand function, do that now.
Yes. If you press *9 on your phone, otherwise under the reactions tab, you can go ahead and press raise hand. Mayor, at this time, no one is raising their hand.
Okay. Give it a couple seconds, and then we will go right into consent agenda consisting of items 7A through 7H. Is there anything that anyone would like to pull?
7H, just to
H?
say thank you.
Yep, sounds good. Anything else? Okay, I'll entertain a motion to approve consent agenda items 7A through 7G.
So moved.
Second.
Any discussion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Thank you. 7H. Ellen, if you wanted to.
Yeah, whenever we get donations to the city,
Yeah.
it's nice to acknowledge those people with special thanks. Unfortunately, I can't find my packet.
And mine.
Donations to the police department by Candace, is it Foe?
I believe so, yes.
So we want to thank her for those
Yeah.
generous contributions.
Definitely.
With-
Thank you, Candace.
With that, I'll make a motion to accept 7H.
Second.
Perfect. Any discussion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Thank you. On to planning business. First, we have a public comment opportunity. This is for items 8A through 8D. So, Brad, if you want to walk us through that?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. We have nobody here in person. We have the applicants, of course, and then anyone online, please use the raise hand function, and Jessica can walk through that.
Yep. If you are joining us via phone, you can press *9 to raise your hand. Otherwise, if you are on a smartphone or tablet, you can click reactions and raise hand. Mayor, at this time, no one's raising their hand. If you'd like, we could give it we do have one
Perfect.
member who's raising their hand. Catherine Drevis is the screen name, Catherine. I'm going to go ahead and ask you to unmute, and then if you could give us your name and address for the record.
Catherine Drivas, 6747 Old Sturbridge Drive. And I'd like to just say that I am opposed to the request by Lennar at Tavira for increasing the size of the sign.
Looks like
I just think that the code should be upheld in this
Oh,
case. Other-
Catherine, can you start over? We're having a technical issue here. I apologize about that.
Are we good now?
Yes.
Think so.
Okay. 747 Old Stradbrook Drive, and I'd like to speak against allowing the exception for the sign, the real estate sign at Tavira. I think that our other businesses have decent signs. It looks neat and nice when you go past them. We don't need a huge sign on 116th to announce that this is a real estate development. The regular size sign is sufficient in my opinion because the houses are right along there. We also don't need any more distractions along that road. The construction itself is distracting enough. And I just think that they should comply with everybody else on the size of the sign. And that's it. Thank you.
Thank you, Catherine.
Thank you, Catherine.
And Mayor, at this time, no one else is raising their hand.
Okay. Then we will go right into 8A, which is the rezoning preliminary plat and plan unit development application for Van Blaricom and Schober Properties, Amberley and Bellwether. And Kendra?
Mr. Mayor, Council, I do have a couple of slides just to highlight a key thing. Next slide, Brad. This is guided low-density residential, and it includes two different properties. And the eastern piece is zoned PUD today. It was zoned that way as part of Bellwether. And the western piece is zoned RSF2 today. And thank you to Councilmember Nichols, who noted that in the January staff report, we had an error and said the RSF2 minimum lot size is 20,000 square feet. In fact, it's 11. So in January, when you reviewed it, you were thinking it was a much larger departure from the RSF2 standards than it in fact is, but I wanted to clarify that for the record for anyone else who looked at that. Planning Commission and Parks Commission both reviewed this at their meetings and recommended approval with some comments that were included in your staff report. Next slide. Again, just for the public, this is the site. It's just west of primarily west of the existing Bellwether development, south of Stieg Road. Next slide. And the yellow doesn't show up as well on this slide, but we've talked about in the staff report the Bellwether portion, which is the green portion on the map, and the Amberley portion, which is the yellow portion in the northwest corner of the site, which is traditional single-family that won't be part of the Bellwether HOA. They won't have access to the homeowners association. Next slide. And those eastern homes are 116 homes that will be in Bellwether, just like the Bellwether homes today. They'll have the access to the amenities. And those western 76 homes will not. They're more traditional single-family. They are zoned today RSF2, but we reviewed them against the RSF3 standards because that's how we reviewed the Bellwether project. When that came in, there were a number of zoning districts, and we used that as the standard for that. So that's why, even though part of the property is zoned RSF2 today, as noted in the staff report, we reviewed it against the RSF3 standards like we did Bellwether. Next slide. And so this slide, I just added one thing to the slide, which is the rear yard setback. When we talk about the flexibility requested for the architecture along Stieg Road, if granted, we said in the staff report it would be same standards as in Bellwether, which increases the rear yard setback along Stieg Road, so it would go from 30 to 35 feet for the Amberley portion and from 20 to 25 feet along Stieg, just for context. That's, next slide. So the flexibility for the architecture was the same garage frontage flexibility requested and approved in Bellwether on the 44 and 64-foot lots. The 50-foot lots in Bellwether and the lots in Amberley, they have not requesting flexibility for. So those will comply with the maximum 55% garage frontage. So this is very similar to the Bellwether approval, and the approval is requested just for those two types of lots in the Bellwether portion. And then there's an architectural treatment for flexibility along Stieg, and they're asking for the same flexibility that they got in Bellwether, because they're going to increase the setback by 5 feet, add some similar landscaping. They want to have some flexibility about the amount of improvement needed on that rear elevation. Next slide. And that affects the red dots here, so the lots along Stieg. Those are the only lots affected by that requested flexibility. Next slide. I did want to clarify, this is a little bit of a change since the Planning Commission. The transportation improvements were identified as part of the feasibility study. And since the Planning Commission meeting, the city engineer has reviewed a request by Pulte for a deviation from the full improvement. And they do recommend option 3 from their memo, option 3 from the city engineer's memo, which provides the ultimate Stieg Road improvement at the project frontage. And then as you move west of the project, it's a 2-lane upgrade to County Road 116. They would pave that portion of Stieg Road out to 116. And then they would add County Road 116 turn lanes. They have indicated they would like to avoid adding a full turn lane and would just paint turn lanes. And so what the engineer has said, and this is included in the resolution, is they are responsible for securing and financing an improvement that's acceptable to the county. If the county will allow that, the county believes that's a safe alternative, then that would be an acceptable path. If the county said you need to build those turn lanes, then they'd need to build the new turn lanes. Next slide. The park was something that had a little bit of a modification since Planning Commission saw it, and I just want to quickly highlight it. They are proposing parkland in the southeast portion of this development, which is northwest portion of the park. And it's very similar to the original concept plans that were seen for Bellwether back in 2018. That's on the left, and the current plan is on the right. But if you go to the next slide, since the Planning Commission saw this, we did get a new sketch which shows the addition of a parking lot. That was one of the conditions from the Parks Commission, so this exhibit was not in your packet, but does show that a parking lot could fit in that northwest portion of the site. We would want to make some modifications to that to make sure that entrance lined up and spend a little more time looking at that alignment. But the proposal as it is today, the ordinance requires 15% land dedication. So for this project, it would be 10.83 acres of land dedication or a combination of land and cash. What they're proposing is 6.8 acres of land for the park, just about 1 acre of land for the trail, and then a donation of about $250,000 of cash in lieu of land. There's certainly some design modifications that need to happen as part of this park, shifting the parking lot access, looking at that parking lot size, moving the well site closer to the street, that could modify the acreage for this, but generally this was what was reviewed by the Parks Commission and recommended for approval. Council certainly has discretion in reviewing that. Next slide. So the preliminary plat, in total, 192 lots with 5 outlots and dedication of approximately 7 acres of land. Next slide. And so we recommend that you move to adopt the ordinance and 3 resolutions as recommended by the Planning Commission and Parks Commission. And happy to answer any questions, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you very much, Kendra. Anyone want to start off with any questions for Kendra?
Go ahead.
Okay. I just had a couple real quick ones. You mentioned that the Stieg Road improvements had changed since the Planning Commission. That had not, the proposal hadn't changed since we reviewed our just initial support of that plan? Correct?
Brad, I would just note that what has changed is there is an official memo from the engineer. The ideas haven't changed, but now we have an
Gotcha.
engineer's memo in your packet dated
Gotcha.
July 14th.
Makes sense. Thank you. Nothing from anyone else?
I don't have questions.
Okay. Do you have something else?
I do have something else.
Go right ahead.
Thank you, Paul. We had some dialogue over email earlier today. I just want to voice some appreciation for the creative thinking that went into figuring out the transportation issues between the city and Bellwether. I would support option 3, as we discussed previously, where the city isn't taking on financial responsibility for creating the infrastructure that would support the development, but still would allow it if the county is willing. So I continue to support that. I had a few things that I wanted to speak to. So we can bring up a picture of the park area.
Is there a better one, Kendra?
Well, the next one has the parking lot, so that.
There we go. Thank you very much. So I did have one concern about this, is I looked at it more, and I apologize I didn't bring this up back in January when it was originally presented. As I'm visualizing what the park would look like, especially with the parking lot, and then the playfield and the well tower, sorry, the water tower and potentially the well, the 6 homes that we see on the northern edge of the park seem like we could be setting those folks up for an unpleasant environment, just because of if we have lighting in the park and events and being next to water infrastructure. And we do know that we have sort of undersized the community park that's across the wetland. I would support seeing those 6 lots changed over into park just to get some additional buffer between that playfield area and the rest of the neighborhood. I also think it would be nice to give residents more visual opening into the park area versus just looking at homes and having the park sort of tucked behind along most of its perimeter. That's one thing I would like to hear us discuss. With regards to the architectural deviation along Stieg, could we please bring that slide up? So, speaking to the Amberley properties that border Stieg with the red dots on the northern portion of the site, maybe this is a question, actually. So, Paul, are these single-family homes also single-story? And is that why Pulte is looking for an exception?
Mayor, City Council members, Paul Hoyer, Pulte Homes. Nice to be here this evening. The homes along where the red dots are, the ones that are further west are the single-family homes. Most of those will be 2-story homes.
Okay.
And the reason we're asking for leniency on the landscape, on the architecture, is because we did increase the landscaping along that boundary.
Okay. So is it the Bellwether properties then on, the red dots we see farther to the right in the graph, are those the single-story?
Yes, that's
Okay.
correct.
Okay. So for the single-story, I understand it being more challenging to do 2 different materials and textures. I would like to propose that we discuss if we're going to give leniency and flexibility on that requirement. What are your thoughts about if it's only going to be one material, it not being vinyl? So if we're going to have a significant amount of traffic along that road, it might make it more appealing if we were able to do something that was a little bit more upscale if we're only going to do one material.
Yeah, I think this is, Mayor, City Council member, I think this is a question of value. And some people would prefer better architecture along these more heavily traveled roads. Others would prefer to see a buffer of landscaping there. The ordinance calls for leniency if additional landscaping is there, so I'm guessing at some point in the past there was discussion about what you find to be of value, and our interpretation of that is heavy landscaping is desired. So we're following your ordinance. We think it's valid. We think heavier landscaping does have an effect. It's not just seeing the homes, it's the whole effect of seeing that extra landscaping along there, especially as it matures. So I tend to agree with the way your ordinance is written now. I think it's wise to encourage more landscaping in those areas.
Thank you. Those are my 2 issues.
Okay. Anything else for Paul while he's up here?
No, you asked a question. Are you
I yield my
then
time.
going to, what was that?
I yield my time to the.
Are you going to have that be a part of the discussion, or were you asking and then want a discussion on the heels of the answer?
If you'd like to discuss the questions that I raised, I'd be happy to have that discussion.
Are you asking for that?
Do you want me to ask for that?
They're not my questions.
Who's on first? We can absolutely have the discussion if you'd like.
Sure.
Okay.
I don't think you got the answer you wanted.
I only asked for an answer.
Okay. That's fair.
Okay. So we're good for now? Okay.
So what did we do in other developments? What did we do with, I want to refer to it as Sawgrass, along 10 and
I don't believe we gave them architectural flexibility on that secondary front. But I would have to confirm that. I'm not,
same with Ravinia and Tavero probably.
Ravinia, we did not give them any flexibility on those elevations. I know that. I'll have to double check on Sawgrass. I don't recall off the top of my head. Rush Creek Reserve, if we gave them flexibility, but I can check on that.
Are any of those single-story?
I doubt it. I don't recall.
I don't either.
Well, we'd have single story in the Pulte development on Bass Lake, right over here, right? Did we do any flexibility there?
No.
Yeah, so,
On which development there?
right over here in Pulte, across from the storage and
Oh, the MI?
MI homes.
What was your question?
Did we
Give the
offer
flexibility.
flexibility in other developments that we've passed?
I thought we did on that one because they beefed up their landscaping between 10 and the backside of those homes. I thought we did,
I don't recall.
we did give them whatever you want for that, some credit or there was some give and take on that.
Okay. Maybe Kendra can find out.
One of the things the reason why I asked, one of the things we've talked about in here is that we don't have this in our code, but having a different code for along a thoroughfare, which wouldn't impact this project, but it's just something to think about, Jeremy, as we go on. It hasn't received much traction, but maybe it should.
Yeah, could be a good conversation for another time, but I'd be interested in thinking about that some more.
Mr. Mayor?
Yeah.
Maybe that's a good question. I'm trying to find that portion of the code that Paul referred to where it gives the trade-off between
Okay.
four-sided architecture and landscape requirements. And I'm not finding it personally. Kendra, do you
I'm
know where
not
that is,
sure
or
what
if it's
he
there?
was referring to either. We do give setback flexibility with additional landscaping.
That's what I
but
remember, yeah.
There's nothing in the code that that I can recall, that gives flexibility for architecture.
Mr. Mayor, City Council members, I don't remember either, so perhaps I made a mistake going back to 2018. I thought for sure it was an ordinance. It would either be in the architectural design guidelines or the landscaping ordinance, wouldn't it?
The landscape ordinance does give setback flexibility with additional landscaping, but we do not have any architectural flexibility.
All right, my apologies, I wasn't certain.
Thank you. And that does agree with what I remember us doing for Tavera when it was approved. They did have more landscaping along major freeway or highways, and we did give them narrower setbacks as a result of that. I think that
Gotcha.
makes
So different specific flexibility, but same kind of idea.
So in light of that insight, I'll advance this proposition for discussion that we would potentially allow the bellwether portion where it's single story to only have one material if it's an upgraded material beyond vinyl, but not allow it on the two-story where it's more practical to have multiple materials as required in the code.
Not allow the vinyl at all on the two-story?
On the one-story,
On,
on the backside.
okay, but do allow it on the two-story.
Right.
What do we allow for accents on a single story home to differentiate?
What did we allow in Bellwether? Or?
Yeah, or in general, I mean, it's kind of hard to differentiate a single story with accents, you know, it's not like you can put a splitter strip in it or put wainscot.
Well, usually what they've done on a single-story home is, and it does depend on the style, but if it's got a peak in the back elevation, which some of them do, you would do
Yeah.
a second material, and you would do that breaker board
Right.
at that roof line there. That, In the Bellwether, I think there's a lot of them that don't have that, and so what we've done as part of the approval that the PUD flexibility was to require the wider trim board, the 4-inch trim board around the windows in an accent color. But it does depend on how the building is designed.
Right.
You know, it usually is a breaker board or a band board that you referred to. It's sometimes, if there's a peak elevation, that'll be the second color or material.
Okay.
I did look up sawgrass, if you.
Yeah, that'd be great.
So the Sawgrass project had single-family townhomes and twin homes, and they did get the same garage flexibility that everyone has asked for. They got some flexibility from the garage. But they did get some flexibility on the townhomes, which allowed less than the 25% stone or brick requirement on the exterior finish. I believe Tavera also got that flexibility on their townhomes, but they did not get any flexibility on the secondary elevation concept that we're talking about tonight.
Gotcha.
I mean, I'd be inclined to stay consistent with what we've done with other developers in the area instead of giving special treatment here.
Yeah, makes sense.
So, I mean, I don't know. It kind of, you can have a house that kind of looks goofy too, and you put high-end finish on the front and then vinyl on the sides and then high-end on the back. So if they want to do vinyl on the back but accent it to make it stand out, I'd be fine with that.
I would agree. I think either one should be acceptable.
Yeah, so just keeping the same, like you said, the same standard.
Right.
Have been doing. I would agree with that. Let's see if there's any other particular, I guess to the park issue that you raised, I kind of wanted to get your two takes on that. Do you think the park as presented in the plans is adequate size? I know with the parking lot, it's gonna get pinched a bit. But just kind of wanted to get your guys' take on that.
I can't speak to adequate size. I'm not a recreational engineer
enough.
of any kind to know what it is, but I know one of the biggest complaints that I've heard out of Ravinia is the park size is too small. So anytime you can make something bigger, I think it would be good. I don't ever foresee lights in that park, to be honest with you. And there's plenty of parks out there that have homes that line them. Some people might think it's a nice aspect of it. I guess those people have a choice when they buy the home to know that, so. To me, it doesn't bother me to have those 6 homes there.
Yeah, I see what you're saying. I mean, they would know at that point, by the time those are getting built, what's going in.
Right.
To me, it would be more just the size of the park, if that's beneficial to adding that space, more so than worrying about people that would move into those 6 homes, because I agree, they would know what's going in there.
What is the density there today? Is there a way to turn off mic 3?
You getting some feedback there? It probably is, I don't know how.
I don't know how to mute it.
You have to hold the button down all night.
All night? There's no
It
plug
doesn't
in.
unplug.
I don't know where that is.
It runs through the desk.
No, it's not possible tonight. It comes all the way
Everything's
back
gonna turn off.
over here.
Cut it. What's the density? What's the density of that new development?
Of Bellwether?
The one we're talking about with the park, taking out 6 houses? What's the existing density?
Yeah, right now the density is just under 3. I believe it's 2.7 units per acre,
So-
which,
So we run into a problem if we take 6 houses out, I think. Just,
We would deduct park area from the net density though, wouldn't we?
that's the pre-development density is 2.7. And so once we do the post-development,
Okay.
that's when we get to 3. So I'm confident they'll get over 3 as proposed. Going down 3 to, what is that, 186, is probably still going to get you over 3.
okay.
good question, though, to double check on.
I won't lose sleep over the size of that park.
Okay.
I'd like big parks, but being that they know that going in, I think it's sufficient.
Okay. Yeah, I was maybe just thinking more in terms of what we have planned for the park in that area. With my big concern seems to be with figuring out the parking and making sure that it all fits into what's currently proposed at the 6 point.
I mean, parking at the park?
Yeah, there's a parking lot
But
on this
do
graph.
people park at a neighborhood park?
Well, I think that's what some of the discussion's been, that it would need it.
Yeah, so, Mayor and Council, at the Parks and Trails Commission, and of course, Sharon's on the call as well. Certainly was some discussion about, we wish this park was a little bigger. If we had a do-over, we'd make this a little bigger. Ultimately, Parks and Trails Commission was fine with it, contingent upon being able to show how a parking lot could work. Because certainly people would drive to this park. It's a nice park. There's also a large open space park for walking as well. So I think it's important. This image here just simply shows that a parking lot could exist. And as Kendra mentioned, we'd like to possibly make some adjustments there. But overall, it works.
And we think we can make those adjustments with the current proposed size.
Correct.
Okay.
And there likely would be some lighting in the park, just to put that on the record, specifically around some trails and any other amenities that we likely would have there. So there would be some lights.
Right.
We'd have, downcasting lights and make sure they're not obtrusive onto those homes, but there would certainly be lights in the park.
But that would be lighting more you're talking about lighting for the parking lot or the trails. We're not talking about ball field lights,
Right.
so we can hold a soccer game in the middle of the night or something like that.
Mayor and Council, it really comes down to what's programmed and planned for it. But I don't envision this being an athletic complex,
Yeah.
certainly.
So the cash in the park dedication fund would be used to fund larger regional parks.
Everything essentially. So in our park dedication fund, we updated that with the comp plan, I believe. And we estimated what each park would have. So we picked some amenities, picked length of trail, picked lighting.
No, but I'm saying if they decided to have a bigger park, then they would have to give less money into the park and trails money.
Correct.
Say they tore that 248 number would go down. So there's
Correct.
no free lunch here.
Right.
Correct. I think Councilmember Nichols asked that question, and Paul did some quick math and thought it was around 160,000 less in park dedication, I believe, or total, sorry. So from 250 to 160. We haven't done our own math, but
Likely close to that.
I have no reason to doubt it at this point, so.
So yeah, I guess it comes down to that trade-off. And if we think the park size is adequate as is, then probably.
Where will the closest next park be to this in the plan? If we had to make up for having a small park, where would we do it?
The next neighborhood park, because I think this is our only community park in the Northwest District.
I think it's the only park that's planned in this district unless something's added. So say, for example, the Stieg property would come in and they'd want to propose something, but this really is the only park amenity in that box from Rogers to 30, from 116 to 101.
So we get one chance to create something unless we amend the comprehensive plan.
Yeah, we have a neighborhood park planned at the southeast corner of 116 and 30.
Okay.
But
Didn't Rogers just get funding or an application support funding for a park a quarter mile north of this specific property? So that would be, it's a huge deal. It's not in Corcoran, but it's in Rogers, but it's just across Stieg from, you know
Okay.
about that, right?
I heard about it. I don't know what the project actually would entail.
It's like a 40-acre oak stand that is amazing, or it's a really cool
That's
piece.
great. Is it going
And
to
they-
stay in Oak Stand or?
Yeah, that's what they applied for the funding from some, I'm not even gonna try to pronounce it, but it's a national, fund for preserving. It's a legacy fund, and, that's gonna stay an Oak Stand.
Awesome.
You should go visit it. It's private property, but, that's gonna be the nearest park, knock on wood.
Okay.
But the question really isn't, in front of the council, isn't can we make the park bigger? It's do you accept the park as presented or not? Right? We either reject it as is or accept it, because this is their offer.
Right, yep.
Their offer could be 0 parkland, 0 trails, and cash in lieu of X.
Mr.
Right.
Mayor,
Yeah.
would this, then, if we wanted to do it, I would like to do it. If we wanted to do it, would that be a condition of approval then? Is that procedurally how we would handle it?
Defer to Brad on that.
Sorry, to remove those homes? Kendra?
Yes, you would modify the approval to say the park should be expanded to eliminate those 6 homes. And I think, when there's land on the comprehensive plan, the city does have some discretion in deciding how big it is. We laid that out for the Parks Commission, they felt was enough. But if the council didn't, you could modify that condition in the resolution to say those 6 lots need to be removed and dedicated as part of the park application. And then if that works, they would come in with a final plan and show us how that would happen. But that would be an amendment to condition 40 in resolution 82.
Thank you, Kendra. So I might have breezed over this in the beginning, but part of what made me want to raise this issue for council is the community park, so not the neighborhood park, but the community park. The target size for that, I believe, was between 20 and 100 acres, and it's actually going to be somewhat less than that? Is it? 11 sticks in my head, but I'm not confident in that number.
I can try to look it up here. Kendra, do you have that quickly?
Yeah, it's in the report, I'm just trying to find it.
You talking about the natural area park?
Yeah, the open space park.
Okay.
Something like that.
How does this playfield park
12.
stack up in size to what we have for the only other parks we have in development, which is Wildflower Park?
Bigger than Wild.
Yeah, Wildflower was 5 acres
Yeah.
approximately, in kind of an odd shape, and this is about 7 acres of park. But again, this one also has the well and the water tower site in it, so
Okay.
it's, it's within the range of a neighborhood park acreage as identified in the staff report, but certainly could be expanded.
Go ahead, Paul.
Mr. Mayor? Kendra, there's a graphic you had, maybe, I must have prepared it and submitted it to you. It shows the 3 different colors. One color was the open space to the south. Another color was, let's call it blue, and that's what we already dedicated for this active park. And another color was pink, which is what we're proposing for the active park. The math works out to real close to 9 acres in total, net acres after the wetlands and everything is taken out. 9 acres for your active park, and I think it was 9.5 acres net for the open space with the woods area.
Okay, thank you.
Gotcha, thank you. So yeah, I guess it comes down to that, if you want to put it in as a condition and potentially have that trade-off of the cash, or if we're fine with it as is.
I mean, I hate to go and make a condition against an offer that they're making.
Yeah.
$250,000 to buy like 15 acres of parkland.
Mayor and Council, this is the image that I think Paul was talking about.
Yes.
And it'd be the reduction from, I mean, depending on how the math actually shakes out, what, 250 to 160 or whatever,
Yeah,
so.
just hypothetical,
Yeah.
just,
Yeah,
it's not an advocacy position. It's just the equivalent thereof.
right. Okay, so I'm kind of getting the sense that maybe we want to keep it as is, as is proposed here.
I have no strong feeling to change it, to be honest with you.
So we could either propose as is.
Mhm.
Are there any conditions to the approval that we've laid out on the table? Or we could propose yours and vote on it. we could either vote for yours or vote. I'll put out there, to vote to, or to, geez. Only been here 5 years.
Mayor and Council, just a question. Which one are you talking about now? Do you want to address these one at a time?
I think we can just go, I'm gonna move to vote on ordinance 2145Z rezoning to PUD. That's an easy one.
Making that motion?
Make it a motion.
I'll second it.
Thank you. I didn't go to law school.
If that's all I picked up from it, I'm in trouble. Any further discussion on that? All those in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? All right, that carries.
Make a
unanimous.
motion, letter B, 2180 approving finding of facts for rezoning.
Do we have a second?
So moved.
All right, any further discussion? All those in favor, say aye. Aye. Opposed? Go on to 80, or 2020?
Yeah, I make a motion, we approve 2021 approving the preliminary PUD plan as it is.
Do we have a second? Give staff a minute.
We flipped the numbers.
In the packet, the
I'm
PUD
sorry.
plan is 82. So it's opposite.
Yeah.
So C and D are flipped, the numbers?
Yes. So
Okay.
so it'd be 82 is what we'd be approving first.
And Kendra, which is the one that has the language that they've discussed?
So 82, the PUD, you talked about two different conditions, just to, you did talk about changing two of those. So are you moving to approve as drafted?
On the 2181.
Okay,
Right,
you want to
which
do
is-
2181?
Well, are you doing the PUD plan? Because I have a mistake in my slide that happened after the packet went out. We changed the PUD plan from 81 to 82, and the preliminary plat is 81.
So C should be 82, D should be 81.
Let me just adjust this quick.
Okay.
Yes, thank you, Brad. I'm sorry.
Well, I made a motion on the two easy ones.
Yep.
Correct?
So on the table, Kendra, for adaptations per our discussion.
There we go.
I believe there was discussion on the PUD resolution 82 to item 14C, which is on page 3, regarding the architectural flexibility, and on item 40 on page 5 regarding the park dedication, was the two things you talked about.
And those are both in.
So did we have, where did we land on, Alan had the last say in the flexibility on design.
What I recall is we concluded that we would either allow them to adhere to code. If they chose not to adhere to code, we would allow single material if it's upgraded. But we're not going to require single material upgrade as the only approach. And just for the bellwether portion.
Because they're not asking for it for Amberley.
Well, there are red dots on them. I think there were.
Okay. Misunderstood that.
So we would not grant it for Amberley, was what we discussed.
Do we have to have two separate resolutions then?
What was the question?
Do we have to have two separate resolutions since we're granting different conditions for the two different properties?
Well, I think if the intent on 14C, Mr. Mayor, Council, is to allow flexibility from the standard to all four sides based on the following conditions, you could say allow flexibility from the standard for the bellwether portion of the development only, if that's the intent. So you could just add on C after standard for the bellwether portion, if that's the intent. And you could just
Does that fit with what you were saying? I want to make sure that didn't get lost in translation there.
Well, I was just saying that I don't think we should, if we allowed flexibility in the bellwether portion, I guess I'd be fine with that and not allow it in the Amberley portion.
Okay. So, was there any other conditions that we still need to
So-
settle on that one?
As it's drafted, C, subpoint I reads, "The applicant shall provide equal architectural treatment on the elevations of a home that face a public right-of-way or park." So the red dots there. At the location shown in the exhibit titled Architectural Design Flexibility Requested in the staff report, the applicant will be allowed flexibility for materiality on those areas identified for upgraded trim only. For example, if 3 sides of the home face a public park or right-of-way, then equal architectural treatment shall be provided on those 3 sides of the building as at the level described in the exhibit and previously allowed in Bellwether.
Yep, so we would
So
just
this
amend
seems
that to being just in the Bellwether development side of it, not the Amberley side.
So it means the increased 5-foot setback from Stieg and the 4-inch upgraded trim on those elevations.
You can write for Bellwether only at the end of that. I mean,
Yeah, you could write it in C or in C1. I was thinking allow flexibility from the standard for the Bellwether portion of the development only.
in C,
Mm-hmm.
yeah.
Or maybe it's after building. Allow flexibility from the standard that requires architectural upgrade to all 4 sides of the building for the Bellwether portion of the development. Make sense?
Yes.
Is everyone,
So I move to make that change
Okay.
to the draft resolution.
want to just do a separate motion before we vote on the whole thing? Okay. I'll second that then. Any further discussion on it? All right, all those in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Thank you.
And I will also move to add a condition that the 6 lots north of the park are removed
Okay.
to create more space for the park and update the park dedication fees accordingly.
Okay. Do we have a second for that?
I'll second it to vote.
Okay, sounds good. Any further discussion on it? Okay, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed?
Nay.
Abstain. And I'll tell you why
Okay.
later.
Later? Okay, sounds good.
You can only tell him then.
I'll tell everyone.
You have to tell everybody now, though.
I'll wait till we get the actual vote on it.
Okay.
Okay. So are there any other text changes we're wanting to discuss in this resolution, or are we ready to vote on the resolution itself as amended? As amended.
I make a motion, we vote on the resolution itself as amended.
Okay, I will second that. Any further discussion?
Okay, I just want to know, I'm actually gonna abstain from this just for the fact that I was out of town, I wasn't expected to be here, so I didn't get a chance to read through this portion of the packet. So
Gotcha.
I'm not comfortable voting yes or no on it.
Fair enough.
So I don't think my vote's gonna matter with the 3 votes.
Sounds good. Okay, anything else? All those in favor, say aye. Aye.
Aye.
All those opposed?
Nay.
Abstain.
That carries 2-1. Thank you. And then,
If there's a rezone, if there's a rezone to a PUD, do we need if 4 people are present and it's 2-0 with 1 abstention?
No, Mayor and Council, that was purely for the ordinance that would require that. There is also one of the resolution for the preliminary plat still on this one as well, but the ordinance needed 3 votes in favor, no matter who attended tonight. Others are simple majority.
Okay,
So 2-1 is approval.
okay.
then I will entertain a motion to approve Resolution 2021-81, approving the preliminary plat.
Second.
All right, I'll make the motion, then John can second it.
Second.
Any further discussion? All right, all those in favor, say aye.
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 Opposed? Thank you very much. We'll move on to 8. Thank you.
Thank you, Paul.
To 8.
Aye.
Sorry.
Can I make a motion to approve 8B?
I think we have.
Do a public hearing.
Actually, it's the only reason it's on, not on consent is I believe it's a public hearing.
Okay,
But then after that, you
Otherwise, it would have
can.
been on consent.
fair enough.
So I'll go ahead and open the public hearing for the easement vacation for Gordon's Country Estates at 19701 and 17 at Jackie Lane. We'll go ahead and open the public hearing if there's anyone that wants to speak.
If anyone is joining us virtually, you can press *9 if you're on a phone. Otherwise, you can press the reactions button and click raise hand. Mayor, at this time, no one's raising their hand. If you
Okay.
want, we could give it just a moment.
Give it a couple seconds. No one pops up. I will entertain a motion to close the public hearing.
Make a motion to close the public
I'll
hearing.
make a motion to close the public hearing.
You do?
Sure.
Oh, I did.
Oh, okay. Then I'll second it. I thought you were correcting me.
No,
Um,
sorry.
Any discussion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Thank
Make a
you.
motion, we approve item 8B.
So resolution 2021-78.
Yes.
Do we have a second?
Preliminary easement. Vacation.
How brief is the staff report?
It's just basically a picture.
Can we hear it, see it?
Yeah, so here's the request, the center sort of dashed piece is the new easement line along the new lot line, and then the two sort of off to the side of that are being vacated.
So there's 3 lots combining into 2.
Correct.
Okay, that's what I thought from the packet. Thank you.
Anything else? So we had the motion.
A motion.
Yep.
No second.
I'll
Do we have a
second it.
Perfect. Any further discussion? Okay, all those in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed? Thank you. That's quick. 8C, PUD amendment request for Tavera, and the recapture agreement and development agreement.
I did have a couple slides to walk through the key items. There are really 4 components to this. You're familiar with the Tavera project. Next slide, Brad. This is the concept that was approved earlier this year, and now they're asking for 4 sort of modifications to that. Brad, next slide. And they are to allow PUD flexibility for a larger temporary real estate and a longer-term real estate sign. They're asking for 100 square feet where 32 square feet is permitted, and to allow more than 4 30-day periods per year. To increase the unit count from the approved 549 units to 551 units. That's due primarily to changes in the wetland boundary that was approved after you saw the preliminary plat. The watershed made some modifications to that, resulting in the loss of 1 unit and gain of 3 more. And then some changes to the architectural standards, a couple different modifications being requested, and a recapture agreement for sewer. I did have a slide for each of those, Mr. Mayor, if you want me to walk through them, or just stop with that summary.
What do you guys think we'd like to?
I'd prefer to walk through it.
Let's walk through it a bit, yeah.
It's just a couple. So the signage request is to allow a 100-square-foot real estate sign. The ordinance allows permanent signs no larger than 64 square feet for any business in town. Nobody in town can have a sign bigger than that. And temporary signs are limited to 32 square feet. Staff's recommendation, though, is that we do allow those temporary real estate signs to be longer on site. We gave you some examples of other cities. I like the idea of a number. 90% was one that was used until 90% of the lots are sold. I will say, I try not to look for code enforcement violations when I drive around, but I will say, when we were reviewing this, I reviewed with Mike Pritchard, and every new development in town has illegal temporary real estate signs out that did not get sign permits. And so every development in this town, Bass Lake Crossings, Tavera, or not Tavera, Ravinia, Bellwether, has about a 100-square-foot real estate sign up. But they shouldn't be. They didn't get a permit. It doesn't comply with their code. But I wanted to note that for the record, so you've probably seen some of those up. You could modify the conditions, but the draft resolution says a 32-square-foot sign that can stay up until 90% of the lots are sold. Next slide. This was the unit request, so just because it was a little hard for me to read, I just wanted to highlight the red circle in the southeast is the lot that got lost. There was an extra lot there that's no longer there because of some wetland impacts. And then up in the north, there was an area that they thought would be wetland that was preserved. The watershed said, in fact, it would be impacted, so they had to mitigate for it, and that gave them the opportunity to provide 3 lots up there. So a total change in 2 lots is proposed to go from 549 to 551, and that's where the changes are. Next slide. The architecture request has a couple different components, and again, I did talk through it in the staff report, but one is to allow garage forward design regardless of how much garage face there is. And this is something the last council said, we will give you flexibility to exceed the 55% garage face requirement, but for those lots where you exceed our ordinance standard, you can't have the garage in the front of the house. And that is applied because of that excess. If the garage is not more than 55%, it can be garage forward. So this was a part of the PUD flexibility. In exchange for the flexibility, the council asked for this higher architectural standard, so we do not support that change. There was also a request for relaxation of the 3 material standards and the equal treatment on the side and rear. And I had a couple of examples in the staff report. And I do think it's worth considering what is a third material. And the one exhibit showed a house that had lap siding with stone or brick, and then had shutters and vents in a different accent color. And I really feel like that meets the intent of what we were trying to do. And it does make sense, perhaps, to provide some flexibility for that and ultimately perhaps change the code. But the other changes that they're requesting are really more significant, and it feels like we're not getting anything new in terms of PUD flexibility to give a pretty big waiver from our standards. And our recommendation as staff is if the council feels like we should provide more flexibility for developers in the architectural standards, we should do that through an ordinance amendment process that applies to everyone rather than just relaxing the standards for this one development. Next slide. And so that was my breathless summary of the report, and we do recommend adoption of Resolution 22186, which approves a couple of the PUD amendments for the additional units, for some flexibility from the temporary sign terms, but not size, and then for that third material, and then approval of the recapture agreement, which is just a way they're paying for some trunk infrastructure that's above and beyond what's needed to serve their development. So if other benefiting properties come forward, we would be able to pass those TLAC fees on to the developer, less than administrative fee. We did that for Ravinia and Bellwether, so it's pretty standard operating procedure. So with that, I know Paul Tabone is here this evening, and both of us are available for questions.
Thank you, Kendra. Any questions for Kendra? Otherwise, if Paul, if you had some comments you wanted to add or presentation?
I do have a question, Mr. Mayor.
Go ahead.
The initial agreement that was signed without the recapture agreement, did that originate from the city? Did we provide the draft, or did Lennar provide the draft?
The recapture agreement?
No, the original contract
Oh,
that
the
didn't have a
development
recapture agreement.
Yes, that's the city template.
Okay.
That's a very good question.
We have a recapture agreement, though, with Ravinia, right?
Correct. When Ravinia came in, we adopted a recapture ordinance, the city did, and then we created a recapture agreement with Ravinia, similar to this, and a recapture agreement with Bellwether for their sewer, trunk sewer.
Can I ask you some questions on the recapture agreement before he gets into whatever he's got? So it says in here, the amount of the recapture to be a maximum of 475. But I read somewhere else it was based on actual costs incurred. So is it actual costs up to 475 max?
Yeah, to a maximum of 475.
And what would the typical TLAC charge be for somebody if the city actually initiated the project and had it?
Mayor and Council, they're somewhat separate. So are you asking what properties would be charged?
Not necessarily what properties would be charged, but I'm wondering if the city was actually doing it in the project, right, and was assessing for the TLAC charge, would the city's amount exceed what could potentially be requested through the recapture agreement?
So Councilman Nichols asked a similar question. We did the math. Essentially, 66 acres would take with today's fee schedule to come to that $475,000. I don't actually know the exact acreage of the exhibit, and I know Kevin Mattson is on the call as well, or on the virtually, and I'm not sure if he understands or knows the acres of the overall exhibit area. Kevin, do you know that by chance?
Mayor and Council, I do not know the total, but I know that if all of them came in within the time period, it would go above the 475, which is why in this case we're capping it, or we're recommending to cap it.
Okay, and it's based on straight acreage, not like buildable acreage or anything like that? Because when you look at some properties, like the Tice property, there's a lot of lowland there, I think, in that.
I believe floodplain and wetlands are deducted from the TLAC calculation, Kendra, is that correct?
Yes, two things. The total area in those parcels that are eligible is 113.51 acres. But the TLAC is only charged on the pre-development area, which is gross land area minus floodplain and wetland, and I do not know that number.
Okay.
I think we, when we did the bellwether, we had like a very lengthy discussion trying to make sure that the developer doesn't make out like a bandit, take advantage of the city.
Yeah.
And all of a sudden they have a sub-industry of connecting people to the line and making money that way. And just for the record, after lots of discussion, we found that that was not possible.
Well, and
If you're wondering about that.
well, yeah, I'm just wondering about.
I mean, everything, I'll just say, we didn't think it was possible.
And if I read this right, the recapture agreement only goes out 10 years, right? So if somebody doesn't connect within that time frame, they don't capture those fees.
Yeah, a couple things let's recap here, and for you as well, Paul, because we had a conversation on a couple different things, and also with Councilmember Nichols. I mean, if I told you that, emailed you the $475,000 would be on actual, not the 475. As it's written, it is 475 as a cap. And Paul, we talked about on the phone today, you talked about it being a change to 15 years, and I just stayed silent on that. It is written as is being 10 years, not 15 years. So one of the things that Paul has talked about, the staff level, is advocating for a shorter duration than 20 years, and he can talk about that. And also the potential for doing actual instead of the 475. At the staff level, we're supportive, still at the 10 years and the 475 cap, but just to make sure everyone's talking about the exact same thing in the room, that's how it is written, the 10 years, 475 cap.
Okay. And then just one other part to it, it talks about a 25-year, is that a 25-year collection schedule?
So that is one thing that did get modified since it went out. The city attorney relooked at that and actually changed page 5. The 25 years is related to the recapture ordinance that I mentioned we adopted when Ravinia came in. And that recapture ordinance says there's no claims arising out of that ordinance, not the recapture agreement, but the ordinance.
Okay.
So it's a little bit of a separate concept, and because that has been in place since 2013 or 14, he changed that from 25 to 15 years. That's separate from the ability to collect funds, it's just about claims. So that did change in a draft that staff had.
Mr. Mayor?
Yeah.
One more question. I've got the city code up, but I don't see the word recapture in it. Where would the ordinance be?
So the ordinance is like our fee ordinance. It's adopted as a separate ordinance. It was adopted not as part of the code, but like I said, because it's similar to a fee at the time, the city adopted it separately, and it's ordinance number 2014. I did share a copy with Brad today as well, but it's a 2014-288.
And we do have, for Mayor and Council, we do have a couple of those that are not in the ordinance. So for example, the ordinance that allows us to assess for delinquent payments is one of those ordinances that's not in code, but it's an ordinance that's been adopted. So there are a couple of these odd ones, so I apologize for that.
Okay. And Mr. Mayor, can I ask
Yeah.
another follow-up question?
Go right ahead.
So for the other developments where we have recapture agreements, I earlier asked who provides the template for the agreement. Sounds like the city provides it. In the other cases, how did the recapture agreement get added to the development contract? Do we get asked to add that by the builder, or how does that mechanically typically function?
In both cases, Ravinia and Bellwether, the developer had a significant trunk infrastructure improvement, and they did ask about the fairness of them building something that now lets their neighbor develop for free. So they asked to recapture that, and so the council, in those cases, felt that that was reasonable within the confines of the recapture agreement. But it was initiated by the developer, and then the agreement drafted by the city attorney.
Okay. And are those also 10-year agreements?
Those were both 20-year agreements.
Okay, thank you.
I guess my question, I think maybe is partially what you're getting at is, why was it not included
In
in
this
this
case.
one? That you're kind of getting at, and maybe
There's
that's
some subtext there, yeah.
a question for somewhat Brad, somewhat Paul, whoever thinks they can.
Yeah, I mean, at the staff level, Mayor and Council may really react to the requests by the developer.
Yep. And Paul, if you have anything to add to that, or if you just want to go into your,
No, good evening, Mayor, Council. Thanks for having me this evening. Yeah, so regarding the recapture agreement, from my experience, it's typically a standalone document. It's not typically something that's added to the DA after the fact. I have been in contact with the staff about trying to extend the time period on it and also the actual cost, and it's for two reasons, actually. Number one, the build-out of the community is projected for probably close to 10 years. Well, if it lags at all, we don't want that recapturability to lapse. Sometimes the market's not perfect. With Ravinia, we were actually ahead of the market for a long time, and we've been able to build it out in, I think it's like going on 8 years now, pretty close. So we would like the ability to have a little bit longer to recapture should we need that time. We don't want the agreement to just lapse and be null and void. Maybe there's the ability to like put some language in where we can ask for an extension depending on how the build out is going or something along those lines. So maybe that's an option. And then regarding the cap, it's kind of ties back into what Brad had said, where we prefer to have the ability to recoup the actual cost that it's costing us to install the line, not so much just have a cap on it. It's not in our interest to, make money by charging people to hook up to it. But if we have a certain amount of outlay at the beginning, because we're the first ones in the door and development pays for itself, and we've all talked about this, then we want the ability to recoup the amount of money that we do outlay and not have it capped. So those are the main two things that I would comment on as long as I was asked. So thank you.
thank you.
Where did that 400 and what odd $1,000 come from?
Sure, Kevin, can you walk through how you got to the $475,000 and try to speak up? It's really quiet in here.
Okay, and I did send you and Jess a schematic. If you want to work on pulling that up, it's really basic. But where it came from, it was based off of so there's a 66 Gleason Parkway project that is authorized and likely to start next week. If you guys recall, and a portion of it was pulling the trunk sewer from the Ravinia development to Tavera. And there's kind of two segments of that. There's a north-south leg, and then there's a western east-west leg. And so what we did is the engineering team took the bid unit prices based on planned quantities for the north-south leg. That north-south leg would be the ones that would be serving these properties. The east-west leg would be serving Tavera, so that we deem that not eligible in our opinion. So the 475 is basically a calculation of the bid unit quantities based on the estimated project cost, so best available data, with a 25% indirect markup for engineering, construction, admin, and then also the easements that were purchased as part of that project were also thrown in there. So I believe it was 350 in construction and engineering, and then 125,000 in easements were the estimated numbers. So if we wanted to go actual, it could go up or down. It's just a little challenging for us to monitor that. We don't have a huge staff size for that, and we base it off of best available data, which is, I would say, fairly common, but it can go either way.
Well, it's based on actual up to a maximum, is how it's written, right?
Correct.
I think that's intending the actual, when we distribute it, it's an actual up to that. So the 475 is calculated on estimated cost, but when like, so say one of these properties came in and we got, 100,000 in TLAC, that's the actual. I believe that's the interpretation. The reimbursement is based on actual.
Thanks, Kevin.
Does that answer?
Yeah, right, well,
Well, I was just gonna say, if he says one of these properties comes in, so you're talking about the properties, the subject properties that could be assessed? Is that what he's referring to?
It would be the ones that come in and have a TLAC charge to them. So for example, there's the Gagne piece, the 40 acres roughly on the northeast side
Yeah.
of 116 in Acamore. That's probably the most likely one to come in. Everything else, I don't know how likely it is to develop.
So, I mean, if we're saying that, if the first ones that come in pay based on actual, then does that mean the people that wait could effectively get a lower charge if we hit the max?
No.
Okay.
So we establish the per acre fee each
Okay.
year in our fee schedule, and they pay what that is. So
Okay.
we reassess it every 2 to 3 years, and then generally have a 3% escalator on the years that we don't do a full formula look.
Okay.
So it's gonna go higher. Like,
do you have a specific issue with the internal staff calculation of the costs of whatever our $476,000 costs are? Do you want to refute that with your own data?
No, I don't want to refute it. What I was trying to get a hold of, and it did come down to the wire a bit, was just if Kevin could provide me the breakdown of how he gets to that number, is what I would like to see.
Oh, okay.
And I did send a note a couple hours ago, I think, before the
Yep.
meeting started. So, I mean, I'm open to continue talking about it with staff, but those are just the things, since I was asked. I wasn't anticipating a whole lot of discussion on the recapture agreement, but those are the things that I've been kind of asking about, trying to get a little more clarity. To make sure we understand how it works.
So, Mr. Mayor,
Yeah.
do we ignore do we make a motion to approve it as is, or ignore it,
Or table it
or
to,
table it, or what is your suggestion?
kind of was my thought, just given that there seems to be a few areas that's maybe still need to be hammered out a bit.
Or
But
approve what we have, or what we, like, I don't know if there's a,
Mayor
And then-
Council, I guess what I would say is I think we're confident in how we got to our number, whether there's support for Paul's request to go upon actual, because we do have best available information, as Kevin mentioned. I think that allows the number to fluctuate, if there is a change based upon actual conditions, if you're comfortable with that. So to me, it'd be cap at 475, be done with it, or look at Paul's request and let it fluctuate to actuals, and then the term. Of course, you could.
I'm comfortable
Table all this.
confirming it as is, and if there's a reason to revisit it, then we revisit it. That's what, if there's some evidence of something that we haven't thought about, we can always revisit it.
It could be amended by council.
Yeah.
If you choose.
Okay. So I guess just to quickly.
That's just that specific piece.
Right. So to quickly touch on a couple of the parts in that, the term, the potential extension that Paul mentioned, where are we kind of thinking on that, if we're in support of that, or just as drafted with the 10-year term?
Mr. Mayor?
Yeah.
I think we might be racing a little bit too far ahead. May I speak for a minute?
Absolutely.
So, from what I'm hearing, and what I discussed with Brad prior to the meeting, we, as a city, stand to we would be collecting TLAC fees as additional acreage develops. In the past, it sounds like we've had other agreements in place and other developments that were initiated when the developer asked us to put it in place as part of the negotiation for those developments, to pass some of those fees on to them for putting in the infrastructure. In this case, the ask wasn't asked and we didn't volunteer it as a city. So the agreement was signed. Now we're in a position where if we don't approve the request, the city would keep that 475,000 should it end up developing in the window of interest. I think before we decide the particulars of the agreement, we should ask, as decision makers setting policy for the city, which has thousands of taxpayers in it, is it right for us to do this and sign this kind of an agreement where we would essentially be foregoing $475,000 that could otherwise go toward developing infrastructure in the water system? So is that appropriate? I would argue when corporations, and Corcoran is a municipal corporation, encounter found money, they typically don't give it back. So in this case, I think we need to have that debate first.
Okay.
Mr. Mayor and Council, if I
Yeah.
could just jump in. So how that would work practically is that we have to have a nexus. To have our trunk fees, we have to have a nexus. So next time, which we have these costs built in. So say we recovered this fees in and did not incur the costs because Lennar pays for the project. What likely happen is we would reassess our trunk fees and maybe they would go down slightly because, so we wouldn't be getting more money essentially, we'd actually be refining our numbers potentially to deduct $475,000 over the rest of the acreage.
Okay.
Which would then pump out a new number.
That helps. So we reduce fees overall across the city.
Potentially. We also could find that we need 2 new lift stations and a force main, so it's the same fee and we're not going to reduce them. So we always learn new information every time we look at it.
Okay. Thank you, Brad. That helps.
Okay, so does that change your thought on what you were just discussing?
So it's still, there's a lot of need for water infrastructure across the city. We're talking about a $10 to $14 million project on the north side of the city, and that's not even all of the need that we have currently. It seems to me like we should think very carefully about whether it makes sense to pass those fees back if it wasn't asked for originally. And the agreement is in place for the last 3 months, and it's coming up now.
Mr. Mayor, just one point of inflation. This one is purely for sewer, right? No, it's, we have needs in both categories, water and sewer, but just to
Right.
clarify, this is specifically for sewer.
Okay.
Thank you. Yeah, I guess to me, if it was part of the calculus when coming up with the whole development agreement, and maybe you guys can speak on this best, that wasn't included, does that significantly change how we would have, what we agreed to in the other areas of the agreement? If not, then perhaps it's not as big of a factor.
Do you want to comment first, or?
Well, I would suggest that we don't ever approve developments looking at trying to profit some way
Right.
with the developer and how they develop infrastructure. So, to that effect, they are incurring a cost or trying to recoup a cost for lateral effect. I mean, I don't see why we should benefit in this regard.
Mr. Mayor, can I ask Kevin a clarifying question?
Absolutely.
Kevin, when did the city and developer understand the overall costs of these projects? Maybe that would be helpful. Was that known at the time when the original approvals came forward, or was this a more recently known number?
You're referring to the $475,000 number?
the overall cost that resulted in this request, was this known during the original approvals, or was this more recent?
We had an estimate for the off-site trunk sewer in the preliminary plat, and that's been refined and I think has gone down because we had, if you recall, we had significantly good bids, about $1 million under for the total project. So this trunk sewer project was outlined in the preliminary plat as an off-site project, and I believe the price went down,
Thanks, Kevin.
which is typical.
Thank you.
I'm not so sure about found money and keeping found money. I don't know if I'd do that in running my business, because I think this is just normal practice. If we ever want, and I'm agnostic to it, but if somebody wants to develop their land and they pull a sewer line across an undeveloped land, if we just say, well, don't forget to do this, or we're gonna take that money, I think that will be the end of any sort of working together with a developer. I think it'd be a dangerous precedent to set, that we would just keep that money. I don't think that's a good idea, even though I would love to get taxed a little less. I don't want to set that precedent. Specifically for the sewer. We could vote on it and then move to the conversation regarding the specific recapture agreement. If you want to set that out, I'm fine with making a motion to not address it and voting on it, and if it passes, then we won't talk about a recapture agreement because there's no need for one.
Why wouldn't there be need for one?
Because if you make a motion to not have a recapture agreement because they forgot it, and it's
If that were to
found money,
pass.
then we won't need to talk about it. That's what you wanted to do, is talk about it first.
Mr. Mayor?
Yeah,
I have a question for my colleague.
go right ahead.
So I think you raised a valid and good question, John, about what is the ethical thing for the city to do in a situation like this? And I was trying to think about parallels. And one parallel that came to mind, and tell me if this is inappropriate as an analogy, but you're a financial planner by trade?
Yeah.
So if you have an annuity contract and your client has laid out a certain amount of money to purchase an annuity for a certain annual payment, and 3 months after that annuity is in place, if it was discovered that it was set up for an incorrect amount of money and your client is now getting more than the person who sold them the annuity intended, what would the ethical thing to do be? To continue to keep drawing that additional sum,
No,
or to allow the update to the contract?
Typically, when in a financial transaction, everything is laid out on the front end, and there's I would assume that if there's a contract, both sides would stay true to that contract. I'm not sure if I like analogies. I'm not sure this is, I don't know if it was as laid out, as clear as what you're suggesting. I don't know the answer to that. So,
Thus the conundrum that we have.
Well,
to contend
to
with.
your defense, most financial contracts have there's a rectification clause if there's an error made.
I think if we've had issues in a bank, if you send too much money to a customer, then the bank has the right to say, we sent you too much money. The customer can't say, well, too bad, it's our money. But that doesn't apply here because, I don't know if we already agreed that we wouldn't have one, or if because we've done this so many times, and it's common to have a recapture agreement for the sewer, I would consider this to be commonplace to have a recapture agreement when housing project lays sewer pipe over an undeveloped area. So that's my frame of reference. If there's a situation where there's no recapture agreement across an undeveloped piece of property, I guess we could look at it but I don't know of that. The only pieces of information I have is that whenever somebody's drug pipe across an undeveloped piece of property in Corcoran, there's a recapture agreement. So I have assumed that one would be coming.
Oh, that's good to know.
I don't know.
And to me, it's fair that they would be able to recapture costs when the Gagne piece develops on that corner. Gagne shouldn't receive a benefit because Lennar put in a pipe.
They wouldn't though. They have to pay the same fees
Well,
regardless.
they have to pay the same fees, correct, but why should the city benefit from it? You know, and to be honest with you, most of these properties aren't gonna develop in a 10-year
Yeah.
timeframe. There's 3 potentially, and that's when I look at it. So,
I'd be comfortable with, I think, going forward with it, with the terms included in the draft of the 10 years and the cap at, sorry, should have this in my head by now, but 475, is it?
yeah.
And keeping it at that, and to your point, John, if it needed to be reassessed at some future date, it could be.
Can I make a motion?
Sure.
Make a motion that is that a single motion on a single item because there are 4 requests? Can we make a motion on one item?
You certainly can do whatever you want, Mayor and Council. I guess it might be easier if there is general discussion on all the
Then do
items
it all
than somebody
together.
making a motion on the entire resolution with any amendments per the discussion. Would be easiest
Yeah.
versus having lots of motions, but.
Can we talk about the sign one?
Yep, absolutely. That's where I was going next, so.
So, Mr. Mayor, do we have a conundrum if we disallow them a sign the same size as other people have put a sign up without asking? Do we need to go to the other people, and if we disallow their sign, do we need to go to other people and say, you need to take down your big sign? It's one thing to not know about it, but we all
Right.
know about it now.
I think now that we know about it, we probably should
Enforce it.
enforce it, yeah.
I don't think it creates a conundrum.
Yeah, that's how I'd put it.
Okay, then. Fine. Do we all then, sounds like we all agree that they shouldn't get the bigger sign?
I
think
agree
so.
with the resolution for number 3 as drafted, with 32 square feet allowed until 90% of the lots sell.
And how is it based on, how are the sales based on? Is that registered sales with the county, or how do you know when you've hit 90%?
When the 90% is, yeah.
You know, that's a good point. Maybe it's 90% of the lots are platted.
Okay.
Platted or building permit? That'd be the only other.
Yeah, one of
Those
those
are
is
two
probably a
options.
better idea.
That,
Just copy.
that, or I believe one of the cities included as comparisons had, one of them had they put it like 3 years or 4 years, whatever the term was, after the building permit was issued.
That was Plymouth.
Okay.
After what building permit? You
The
know,
original building. Such signs shall be allowed for 3 years from the date of the original building permit issuance or until the construction and the development is completed, whichever occurs first.
That's just enough.
I think we've been using number of homes for a variety of other reasons when we accept the streets, for example. So I think, Kendra, just draft, I would say 90% of building permits issued, or some number of building permits issued. We can track that pretty decently.
yeah.
We all-
Whatever's easiest for staff to track and most accurate.
And also, you could plat something, 100-lot plat, for example, and that could take a couple of years for those homes to actually get in.
Right.
Mr. Mayor?
Yeah.
Do we issue certificates of occupancy? I've heard that referenced in the code. Maybe that would be better, because then you know the home is complete. So when the 90th percentile certificate of occupancy is issued?
Yeah, but you're not gonna be selling lots on homes that, those lots are already sold. You're basically waiting for the ribbon to go up on the door and welcome in at that point, so why keep the sign up that long, you know? I would do it based on the building permits side of it. And
Yeah, because I
there's
guess.
probably homes in the city that don't have certificates of occupancy, or it took a while to get them.
Yeah, if it's the same percentage, the building permit marker would be first, then the
Yeah.
certificate of occupancy.
That's
Yeah,
fine.
I'm fine doing it with the building permits. Are we all on board with 90% being the number?
Yes.
Yeah, that's
Yes.
fine.
Yeah, cool. Now on to some of the bigger issues I know that Paul wanted to discuss, namely well, actually, let's do the total unit count first. I believe it's at 549 currently, asking for 3 additional lots. Any thoughts on?
I would not want to penalize them twice.
So,
Because because they lose a lot. They lose a lot due to the wetlands delineation they have to do. They're also losing a lot because because we tell them then we can't build. This is old data. So they,
Based on the watershed mitigation,
yeah, the watershed said you have to do a wetland mitigation.
yeah.
And they don't get credit for whatever the watershed took away.
And
They
just-
should get credit for that.
Right.
They can't get penalized twice.
Mayor and Council had a brief conversation, I believe, with Councilman Nichols on that, not the others. So, and Kevin, correct me if I'm wrong here. So the watershed came in, and obviously they lose the one per the watershed approvals. And the watershed previously said, save this area, this other area, and preserve this wetland. And it sounds like after more study, those wetlands wouldn't be effective wetlands. So they said, rather than keeping non-effective wetlands, buy credits and then have those homes back. And I think that's correct, Kevin. Is that fair?
Yes, with just the clarification that it's a Wetland Conservation Act process, not an Elm Creek watershed process. It's a technicality, but that is correct. And they are required to mitigate at 2-to-1, just like any other mitigation. So they basically have to pay to fill that, and then it becomes basically in the WACA eyes available to use for whatever upland purposes.
Gotcha.
So this was dictated by the wetland folks, and it's a TEP, so it's multiple agencies that are involved in that decision.
Gotcha, thank you. I guess my initial thoughts on that would be to allow the increase to what the initial approval was, and not necessarily beyond that, which would be, I guess, adding the one back that they lost.
Yeah, I honestly don't see I don't see the impact of adding those additional homes in the area they're at. There's nothing behind it but a large bit of vacant land. You know, it's back on that corner of that one piece of property.
Yeah.
So, I mean, there's nothing that's gonna look out. They're gonna look out across the swamp at the backside of more trees and another parcel of property that at some point will probably be developed in the same manner.
That is true. So you'd be in favor of?
Yeah, I mean, if they were coming in and saying they wanted to whack down the lot size by 5 feet in every lot to
Right.
put 5 more lots in, then I'd have a different opinion.
Right. Okay.
I would be okay going back to 549. I don't know that we necessarily are responsible for making up for what the watershed and environmental panels dictate.
Okay. Any different thoughts or thoughts on that, John?
No, I agree with Alan.
Okay. But if we were to split the difference and prove the 550? Make everyone a little happy.
Mayor and Council, can I ask a question on that?
Sure.
From staff standpoint? So it would just be, would be approving some number, and then at final plat, they would have to do final design, is that correct, Kendra? Okay, I just wanted to make sure we didn't have to design lots in the
No.
fly here or something. Okay.
Good clarification.
Are you against raising it? So you want to compromise between?
My initial, like I said, my initial thought was just to allow it to the initial approval. And I thought this would be a middle ground between that and where you guys are.
If you set to 550, I would be okay with that.
Okay.
I can live with that.
I guess I don't care. I don't see the point of shorting one lot, but.
Okay. I think generally can move on with it then.
Excuse me, Mr. Mayor,
Yes,
can I ask a question?
absolutely.
As the applicant and the developer for the site plan. One thing that I do want to note, or I guess with regard to the PUD amendment, Brad and Kevin pretty much hit it right on. So we had to fill or prepare to fill two wetlands up on the north side, wetlands U and wetland B. So what happened there was when the TEP came back and reviewed our application, what they essentially told us was, we believe there's a chance that these wetlands are going to cease to be wetlands. So we want you to calculate this area and then purchase credits at a 2-to-1 ratio. So to purchase credits, what we had to do is go to a bank and spend roughly $135,000 to buy that. So as Kevin said, now that we've mitigated for it, we would like the ability to use them as an upland use. And it's true, we're going to have to final design them, but it would really help offset the cost for the credit purchase that we had to make if we could get 2 instead of 1. And as Kendra said, it is somewhat of an arbitrary number, but we would appreciate the ability to recoup the cost for the indirect impacts that we had to mitigate, and it would almost equal out with the addition of the 2 home sites. So that's why we're asking for that.
Okay. Thank you for the clarification.
So if you can't get the additional home site, you're gonna pass the cost on to the additional 400, 550 homes for that one lost site? Obviously, right? You got a cost plan.
We'd have to look at it at that time, but as we're looking at things on the front end, if we can recoup a little bit of the wetland. Yeah, and to be honest, just to let you all know, this site has been tricky with wetlands, and I think I wrote a couple of quick numbers down here. We have 68.9 acres of wetlands on site. And about 3.5 were impacted primarily by roads in Rivera, and 0.33 were impacted or will be impacted for future Hackamore improvements. It's a total of 3.79 acres, and it's like 5% of the total. So contrary to what people may think, we actually saved 95% of the wetlands on the site. So that's a pretty big environmental preservation effort when you're coming in and designing the homes that we're designing. So that's part of what was driving this, is we had a certain amount that we knew we were going to have to mitigate for, and then kind of through the process it ended up being a little bit more. So things do change, and that's one of the reasons why I made the request.
Gotcha.
So I just wanted to note that, because we do try to preserve as much wetland as we possibly can.
Thank you, Paul, that's helpful. Good to know that.
So I guess, does that change anyone's take on that 550 versus 551?
I just don't see the benefit of haggling over one spot.
Fair enough. I guess I'd be okay with going to the 551. I just don't, I guess, like the principle of going up on everything, including the number of units that were approved, right off the bat from the initial approval in, not very long ago, several months ago.
I agree. It's a big development. It's still
But at the
one of
same,
the biggest that we have.
right, it is, absolutely. But at the same point, I'd agree with Alan that it's not, the one, haggling over the one lot's not really the hill I want to die on. But it's not the end of the world, it's just more the principle of it. But if the 551 is a big deal to helpful to Lennar, and we don't see a downside to it, I'd be okay with that, I suppose, in this instance.
Yeah, I personally don't see the downside to it.
I'm okay with the 551, partly because I prefer to be less flexible on the garage forward design.
Fair enough. Okay. Jeremy?
I feel that we should honor the original agreement. And 549 was approved. I'm comfortable going to 550. I don't feel like it's the city's responsibility to continue to keep compensating for any wetland impact or costs that might occur as the process is executed.
Gotcha. Understood. Let's move on from this, and then when it comes time to vote for the entire thing, if you think that's something you'd like to separate out and vote on, we can do so at that time. So let's move on to the garage forward discussion. And I don't know if, Paul, you had some slides or something you wanted to go over?
Yeah, I do have a presentation I'd like to run through. And I'll try to make it quick, but
Sounds good.
there is a decent amount of detail to go through, so I do appreciate your time.
Bear with me, Mayor and Council.
So before you this evening, there are 3 actual architectural requests for some flexibility in Tavera. The first one is to allow garages to protrude no more than 10 feet in front of the home. That's primarily for additional plans that we would like to build, such as the Lewis and the McKinley. They're some of our more popular plans, and we build them with good customer interest throughout the Twin Cities, but it's not something that we're able to build here. One thing I also want to note on that request too is when we did have the discussions with the previous council regarding the garage forward product, what really caused the bigger reaction was that we were proposing homes that were brand new at the time. They had just been designed, and some of the garages were as far out in front of the home as 15 or 20 feet. So I'm not proposing and not asking for consideration to have those original homes that we had designed, 3 years ago that were not met well, but I'm hoping that we can find some middle ground on that request. And we would include the garage door windows, the brackets, the handles, just like we've done in Ravinia to enhance the garage appearances. The second one is to allow flexibility for only one color, and I'm going to go through that in a little bit more detail. Ravinia right now, as of, I think, with the requirements as they are, requires 2 to 3 different colors or materials or changes or what have you, and I'm sure Kendra spoke to that in her presentation. When we'd still incorporate the combination of the window grids, the shutters, the gables, the stone, the brackets, and all the other architectural elements, the trim, the railings, and all the other decorative elements that we typically use. And then the third one is to allow for some flexibility to allow the wrap around the windows to not just be LP, or not mandate just LP, which is the wood fibers wrap that you see, but also to maybe incorporate the option to do vinyl around the homes, around the windows. So you would get a 3 to 5 inch wrap, and it still gets the look and feel of the wrap, but it doesn't have to be that. So there's a lot of considerations here. I'm going to get through this as quickly as I can, but there's a lot of kind of rationale behind these asks. So we believe that through the conversations with staff that we are meeting the intent of the code. And the general intent of the code is to avoid monotony and use colors, textures, and materials to look nice, make sure everything's practical, that it can withstand the elements, and it provides differentiation in the streetscape. So you're not getting a box with some windows and it's not boring and it's not drab looking. In 2020, after getting through the preliminary plat, we had submitted 27 single-family floor plans with 5 to 6 elevations each. And the general request was that if the width, depth, and grading worked, then we wanted to be able to build that particular floor plan or that particular home for the buyer and kind of let the buyer drive a little bit more on what they like with the options and the configurations of the homes. One thing that I want to note is that Lennar is not going to build homes that are undesirable or that are considered unsightly or that won't sell, and we've done it. We've released stuff into the marketplace. It wasn't met well. People didn't like the colors, they didn't like the floor plans, they didn't like the materials, they didn't like the features, whatever it was. And I actually had to go back and get PUD amendments in other communities because we had to pull that product from our lineup. So we don't want to build a home, that people don't want to buy, and we do a significant amount of volume every year. So we have a pretty good beat on what our customers like, what they want, what they'll buy, and we do get feedback on our floor plans, and we change them out, and we redesign things, and it's kind of a constant evolution of what will work. The other thing to note is that Corcoran has seen tremendous growth since 2014. I talk to staff regularly for permit reviews and plat reviews, and it's a lot of resources being used. And now you have, I think, 3 or 4 different national builders in town with a lot of volume, a lot of permits. Based on what my home building guys are telling me, the current turnaround time for a single family permit is right around a month, give or take a bit. So it can be time consuming, and there's a lot of detail in that, I'm trying to expedite that a little bit more too. I also want to note that I've talked with Kendra about it, and the garage forward requirement isn't necessarily codified in the city code. It was a requirement of Ravinia. It was something that was brought up at the onset of that community, and it was carried forward to Tavera. When we had showed architectural samples, we showed the garage forward stuff, and we kind of talked about it, but it was kind of carried forward despite the variances, or I use variance, but the varied types of architecture that we were trying to get. And then the last kind of thing that I want to touch on, or last couple of things, is the community character in Ravinia versus the community character in other Lennar neighborhoods. And Mr. Mayor, you and I have walked a couple of Lennar neighborhoods. I know, Mr. Bodema, you've been out and about looking at our product.
I used to live in one.
Good. And so the question that I would ask you is the community character in Ravinia that much different than the other communities that we build with similar colors and materials packages? And I guess even a more direct way to say it would be, does Ravinia look so nice and these other communities just don't? I guess is probably the most simple way that I can put it. And the examples that I'm going to pull from are our Laurel Creek community in Rogers, which has some different product, has some different homes. It was a little bit of a different effort, but a lot of the stuff, I think you will see it overlaps. And the last thing that I want to bring up in the considerations is that typical buyers want to save on the purchase of their home. Like, money is important to a lot of people, a lot of price points. And so talking to my purchasing guys, the materials packages in Ravinia end up costing somewhere between $2,000 to $5,000 more than our standard architectural packages. And I'm not up here to like preach about money and everything else. I just want to bring it to your attention that there are those buyers that would rather spend that money on something else. Maybe an option upgrade inside the home, maybe just pocket it and use it for a vacation or something. But if that is part of what's included in the mandated architectural standards, then it does end up costing the ultimate buyer a little bit more money. And most people would want to try to save that if they have the option to, while still delivering a good value in a nice neighborhood to live in. So these are the next slide, please.
And Mayor, just since I have the time here, not that I want to belabor this presentation any longer, but I will just say that the characterization that's taking nearly a month or over a month is not accurate whatsoever.
Okay. Well, good to know. That's what I was told internally. So thank you for clarifying that, Brad. So these are the architectural types that were submitted with Tavera. You can see there's a little bit of everything. We have 4-car garages, 4-car garage options. We have 2-car garage options. We have some of the ones that you would see that would look probably similar or from Ravinia as well. And so what we were trying to do, again, was the ask was, if it's generally something that the market wants and that the buyers want, then we want to be able to build it. So keep going, please. So this is actually in Ravinia, 6450 and 6405 Larkspur. Now you can see on this garage right here, there's a little bit of a protrusion there, probably about 4 feet. And I think what happened there is that when we submitted it, first of all, the buyer may have selected a garage bump option, which makes the garage a little bit deeper because people like extra spaces in their garage. But then I think when staff was reviewing it, they looked at it and said, well, does this meet the intent of the approvals and does it meet the intent of the code? And so I think the answer is yes, because you have a lot of architectural variation on the facade there. You have the windows, the brackets, the gables, the trim. And so that's one example that I wanted to bring up. The other one, kind of to the other side, is 6405 Larkspur. And again, those garages are set up a little bit, maybe 6 to 8 feet, so 3 to 4 feet per garage. But when you go back across the street and you look at it, it ends up looking like your eye is drawn to other things on the facade. It's not necessarily just drawn to the garage. And when you look down that streetscape, what you see are the peaks and the windows and the porch pilasters and that pop of red on that other home down the way a little bit. So even though that garage is out front a little bit, it's not completely garage dominant. And that's what I would ask, you know, is that something to consider, or can we consider that? So same thing here, 3 homes in a row, and all of them have a little bit of a garage protrusion. And what I did is I took that picture, I took a picture of each one, and then I looked back down the block in the opposite direction. And so yes, you see the 3-car garage for the vehicles or toys or whatever the homeowner wants to put in there. But part of that is because we live in a vehicle-dependent society with that lifestyle. But when you look back down at all 3 of them on the streetscape, your eye is also pulled to the peaks and the brackets and the windows and the other architectural aspects of the front elevations. And so if we go to the next slide, what I'm trying to ultimately get to is there was the staff report did note that the larger garages tend to dominate the front elevation, and prohibiting the protrusion limits the impact of the larger garage. I don't necessarily agree, or would ask, do you agree with, is it a full prohibition of the garage, or would limiting the garage protrusion limit the impact of the garage? And is there some middle ground that we can find? And it's the same example. I mean, look at the home there. The garage is out in front a little bit, but it's nowhere near 15 or 20 feet like what the council was concerned about a couple years ago.
How far is it out?
Probably 2 to 4 on that first one and about 4 on the second one. So maybe 6 to 8 feet total out front. But when you look at that home straight on, your eye is drawn to the other things. It's drawn to all the other interest that's going on in that front elevation. And the same case can be made as you look back down the street there with the porches, the pilasters, the peaks. I mean, so the idea is making the garages flush. I would ask the council, does making the garages flush solve the garage problem, or does having additional architectural features help offset the garage? And is that something that's acceptable that we can look at and maybe find some middle ground on? This is an example of the window wrap, and I just want to show you how it looks. This is vinyl window wrap. So when you look at the back of the homes, you still have a nice clean look on the back. There's a little bit of articulation on the home to the right there. And then I just took another picture so you can see how they look from a distance there. And I actually took it from someone's backyard. I asked her if I could walk back there and take a few pictures, and she was okay with it. But just to show, we can still get the window wrap look with vinyl. It doesn't always have to be LP. So I think this might be the last example. These are 2 of our more popular floor plans. And the one on the top, that's about an 8-foot protrusion, I think. But when you look back at it, your eye is also drawn to the other things. So again, can we look at the other things that we have going on the front of the home to offset that garage, instead of just saying, well, the garage has to be flush and that's the only way to solve the garage concern. And so my conclusion in the discussion is that we want to try to simplify the architectural reviews. We do want to offer as many floor plans as we possibly can. We want to create a high-quality neighborhood at a really good value for our buyers. And we want to make sure that everyone's generally satisfied. And we want to make sure that we're enhancing the neighborhood versus, if we're going to add something, to really enhance it versus just doing it to check a box. And my point with that is that home up in the upper left is the one that has been submitted for the model in Tavera. Now that home with that color package was built multiple times in Ravinia, but it was rejected for Tavera because there's no color change above the roof line. And my point is, if you were to change the color on that home, like everything is designed to pull it together pretty nicely. And Kendra does reference that in her report with the shutters and the grids and the other peaks and articulation that's going on. But if you're changing the color, you're changing it just to meet the code. But the home, I think, satisfies the intent of the code, and that's what I'm trying to demonstrate. And then the other one on the left, or on the right there, I'm sorry, that's virtually the same home. One of them the blue one is in Laurel Creek. The other one got built in Ravinia. I'm not 100% sure what happened with the garage door. I'm still trying to figure that out. But if you look at the features of the homes, you have the wrap, the grids, a couple of peaks, and sometimes clean lines look nice. You don't need all the surface variation and all the articulation that we have. And I think I would ask, would the council think or entertain the idea that that home could fit in a row of of the other homes that are being built, and would it add some variety to the streetscape? And is that something that we could discuss? So that's the main thing, and those are the main things that I wanted to bring up. And I want to thank you for your time, because I know there's a lot going on, and I just brought up a lot, but I just thought it might be worth to have a discussion, maybe try to get some clarity as we get into Tavera and as we look into the homes that we want to try to offer in the marketplace.
Thank you, Paul.
Thanks.
Any questions for Paul specifically?
Thanks, Paul.
No. So, just on the discussion of it, I know, John, you'd mentioned the garage forward thing a little earlier.
Yeah.
Want to start us off there?
I'll just, yeah, I think this was helpful.
Yeah.
I guess I'm open to the group in what they think. Part of me thinks, because I'm not gonna move there, and I don't care that much, because I'm not a buyer, you know, so, but the impact, what will those designs impact Corcoran when Lennar is gone and it's just a neighborhood? Those are the things we need to think about. Not our own, maybe not our own personal preferences, but how will that impact our town 20 years from now? And I'm not sure that I can make a good case that those the ones that Paul showed that would be rejected would somehow diminish the neighborhood. I don't know if I could.
Right.
I don't know if I could make that case, I'll be honest.
Alan or Jeremy?
Well, I'm trying to remember what we did with the flexibility in the initial one. We had a lot of discussion around garage size and the flexibility of 55% and, so to be honest with you, I'm having a hard time remembering what we decided on that. So we did allow up to 55%, they just couldn't protrude forward?
If you have 55% of the front of the house that's garage, 55% or less, it can be garage forward.
Okay.
But when you add the third or fourth garage and you exceed 55% of the front of the house as garage, at that point, you can no longer have it garage forward. At that point, it's so much garage, the council said, we'll let you go over 55%, but when we give you that flexibility with this PUD, you need to push it back so it doesn't protrude in front of the house.
Didn't we have some discussion about including the upper elevation as well in that number? I'm trying to remember a discussion that Ron brought up, and I can't remember where that went.
I don't recall that. We may have had it as part of the discussion, but it didn't end up being part of the PUD.
Okay.
You're saying just taking the first level, if there are other things going on over there.
Well, that's what the ordinance is, isn't it? It's based on the first level?
It is. I think we might have had that discussion with Sawgrass, now that you're saying that, when we gave the same flexibility, and that part of the findings of fact for the flexibility was there's second stories and it's not really that much garage. So there was some discussion about that, but for Tavera, it did not make it into the findings of fact, and it wasn't part of the analysis. We're still dealing with the code the council adopted. And so, as I said in my presentation, if the council feels like, this is onerous, then maybe we should look at the code, because we're not getting anything new with this PUD, but we're granting new flexibility.
I mean, I guess my thought is, unless we think it's a unreasonable big and a serious issue that we're having this guidance or restriction on the garage forward aspect, we should, I would think we'd stay the course unless we think it's a big problem for what's already been approved.
Yeah, I'd agree.
Chairman?
Totally agree. These agreements are not 10 years old. This is a new development. It was just negotiated and signed 3 months ago. I actually see additional requests for changes so soon as kind of a red flag. If I was negotiating with the supplier where I work, and we had a contract we put in place, and 3 months later they wanted to give me a cost increase, I would not be entertained. I wouldn't even take that meeting.
If
I could speak to that for 1 second.
Sure.
I was very clear when the PUD came in and we were going through the preliminary plat and the final plat that things were going to change. So I just want to let you know that. I'm not trying to, pull a bait and switch. I've been at this for a while, and through the evolution of Ravinia, we came out with new plans, we merged with another builder. We got feedback on some of the plans we were building and we stopped them. There's a lot that changes. It's not just a set, this is what it is now, and that's why I'm here. So trying to, look at what we have, and even a year ago, if you were to go through our plan lineups, some of the stuff that we built a year ago, we're not building now. I mean, it changed.